It was late afternoon when the knock came. Not hurried, not casual, but measured, like someone who already knew I'd answer. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel, the smell of sautéed garlic still clinging to my fingers, and opened the door. A man in a gray suit stood there, holding a leather folder against his chest. His expression was neutral, professional, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Khan?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, tightening my cardigan around me. "I'm here regarding the property at 14 Rosewood Lane." My chest tightened. That was our address. "Yes. Is there a problem?" He hesitated just enough for my stomach to drop. "May I come in?" "This is a sensitive matter." The words sensitive matter don't usually belong at someone's front door. I stepped aside slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. Unpaid bills? Zoning issue? A mistake? He laid the folder on our coffee table like a doctor placing x-rays before giving bad news. As he opened it, my eyes landed on the first page. Legal headers, names, signatures. And then I saw it. Primary owner, Nadia Khan. Not my name, not even close. My throat went dry. I think there's some mistake," I stammered. "This is my house. My husband and I built this house together. There's no Nadia Khan here." The man's voice softened. "I understand this is difficult, ma'am. But this property is legally registered under Mr. Asim Khan and his wife, Nadia Khan. You are listed as an occupant, not an owner." The clock in the hallway ticked louder than it ever had. Somewhere, a kettle whistled faintly from the kitchen, but I couldn't move. "His wife?" I whispered. "I'm his wife." And that's when every laugh, every shared dinner, every late-night plan about the backyard renovation cracked like glass under a hammer. Before that day, my life wasn't extraordinary, but it was mine. Asim and I had been married for 9 years. We met through family friends, the kind of arranged but not really introduction where two people sit awkwardly at opposite ends of a living room while aunties smile too much. What stood out about him then was his calmness. He was a civil engineer, quiet but thoughtful. When he spoke, it wasn't in flowery words but in plans, blueprints for life. I liked that. I had spent most of my 20s taking care of my younger siblings after our father passed. For once, someone had a plan for me. Our house at Rosewood Lane had been our shared dream. I still remember standing in the empty plot, dust swirling around my sandals, when he showed me the mock-up. "Here," he said, pointing to the sketch, "will be the kitchen window. You'll see the whole garden while cooking. And here," I added, pointing to the blank wall opposite, "a bookshelf." Floor to ceiling, we laughed then. We talked about children we hadn't had yet, dinner parties we hadn't hosted, summer evenings on the porch swing we hadn't bought. Brick by brick, I watched it rise. I picked the tiles, the paint colors, even argued with the contractor about the bathroom fixtures. Asim was there every evening, sleeves rolled up, checking measurements. When we finally moved in, we carried no fancy furniture. Just 2 mattresses, a second-hand sofa, and a head full of dreams. I loved that house like it was a living thing. I knew the way sunlight crept into the kitchen at exactly 7:45 a.m., the creak in the third stair, the faint smell of jasmine from the neighbor's fence that drifted in through the bathroom window at night. Life was ordinary in the best way. I ran a small online craft business from the spare bedroom. Asim worked long hours but made time for Friday dinners. He was meticulous. Bills were always paid, documents always filed. He didn't like surprises. We had our arguments, of course. He was emotionally reserved, sometimes too practical. I was the talker, the dreamer. But I believed we were building something solid. Our friends would say, "You two are such a stable couple." And I'd smile, feeling proud but also a little smug. If there were cracks, I didn't see them. Or maybe I chose not to. The first tiny clue came 2 months before the lawyer's visit. It was late at night, and Asim had left his laptop open on the dining table. Normally, he was careful about his things. But that night, he was rushing to make a midnight call with a client. I went to close the laptop. and a notification popped up, a calendar alert. Meeting with N. Property paperwork. Final. I remember frowning. N? He had no colleague by that name. I brushed it off. He worked on multiple projects. Maybe it was a contractor or a vendor. But a week later, I overheard him on the phone, speaking softly. Not romantic, exactly, but personal. Yes, I'll handle it. No, she doesn't know yet. She. I told myself I was imagining things. He was private, yes, but not dishonest. If I had trusted my gut then, maybe I would have found the truth earlier. But love, real, steady love, makes you blind in quiet ways. Back in the living room, as the lawyer gently closed the folder, I sat frozen. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, I understand this may come as a shock. But according to the records, this property was purchased jointly by Mr. Asim Khan and Mrs. Nadia Khan 5 years ago. If you require legal counsel, I can refer... 5 years, I interrupted, my voice cracking. We built this house 9 years ago. He looked genuinely confused. The documents indicate construction began under different permits. Perhaps. It would be best to speak directly with Mr. Khan. I let out a laugh, bitter, shaky. Oh, I will. The man gave me his card, offered an awkward nod, and left. The door clicked shut, and the house, my house, suddenly felt foreign. The sofa where Asim and I had eaten pizza after painting the walls, the rug I chose on a whim, the family photos lining the staircase. I stared at them and realized I didn't know whose house I was standing in anymore. After the lawyer left, I sat in silence for a long time. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. The clock kept ticking. The kettle had long gone quiet, and my phone lit up with Asim's name. On my way home, the message read. Just 4 simple words. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have typed, "Who is Nadia Khan?" I could have called him, screamed, cried, demanded. Instead, I just placed the phone face down and waited. When Asim walked through the door that evening, he was exactly the same as always. Shirt tucked in, hair slightly ruffled from work, the faint smell of sandalwood cologne trailing behind him. He placed his briefcase by the shoe rack and loosened his tie. "Smells good," he said casually, glancing toward the kitchen. "What's for dinner?" I watched him, really watched him, as if trying to find cracks in a statue I'd been admiring for years. "Something simple," I replied, my voice even. "Lentils and rice." He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly, like he always did, and went upstairs to change. The absurdity hit me like a wave. How could a man look so normal when my world had just been split in half by a stranger's folder? Over the next few days, I moved differently. I didn't confront him right away, not because I was weak, but because something inside me whispered, "Watch first, listen." And so I did. I noticed the late-night phone calls became more frequent. Sometimes he'd step out to the balcony and speak in hushed tones. Other times, he'd say he had site visits on weekends, something that hadn't been common before. One Saturday, he told me he had to check on a delayed project on the outskirts of the city. I offered to come along. He hesitated, just for a second. But in that second, everything inside me tightened. "No need," he said, forcing a smile. "It's dusty and boring. You'll hate it." I nodded, pretending to accept it, but I watched him leave. Shirt pressed, hair neatly combed, not a hint of construction dust on him. That was the day I made a quiet decision. I would find out the truth myself. I started small. I searched through our home office, the one where he kept every document neatly filed. Asim wasn't sloppy. He prided himself on precision. Bills, bank statements, contracts, all there organized. But then, in a folder marked Archive Old House Docs, I found something odd. A property transfer document dated 5 years ago. The signatures read, Asim Khan, Nadia Khan. There it was again, that name, Not as a neighbor, not as a co-signer, as wife. My vision blurred as I stared at the signature. It wasn't forged. It was deliberate. There was no trace of my name anywhere. I sank onto the office chair, clutching the document like it was a betrayal carved on paper. The real unraveling began 3 nights later. He had left his phone charging in the living room while taking a shower upstairs. He rarely did that. Usually, the phone was always in his pocket, always locked. This time, a message popped up before the screen dimmed. Nadia, did you talk to her yet? We can't delay the legal process forever. My heart stopped. Another message followed. Nadia, she'll find out eventually, Asim. I can't live in limbo anymore. I didn't need to unlock the phone. Those 2 messages were enough to rip open every quiet suspicion I'd tucked away. When he came downstairs, towel around his shoulders, humming as if nothing was wrong, I was waiting in the living room. I held the property document in one hand and gestured to the phone with the other. Asim, I said quietly. Who is Nadia? He froze. Not dramatically. Just a slight stiffening, like a deer catching a sound in the distance. Where did you hear that name? He asked too carefully. From a lawyer who showed up at our door, I replied, with legal papers. Papers that say, my house belongs to your other wife. The towel slipped from his shoulders. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. Asim, I said again, my voice shaking but firm. Who is she? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaled slowly, and sat down opposite me. It's complicated. I laughed, short and bitter. Oh, I bet it is. She's someone I married a long time ago, he said finally. Before you and I. It wasn't supposed to matter anymore. Things were complicated with her family. I thought it would be resolved quietly. I stared at him, my hands trembling. You're married to someone else. You never told me? It wasn't like that, he insisted, leaning forward. We were separated. It was never real. Not real. Asim, you bought this house with her name on the deed. You signed papers with her. How is that not real? She insisted on putting her name, he muttered. It was a legal thing. I didn't think it would ever come up. My voice rose, something between fury and heartbreak. You built this house with me. You picked out tiles with me. You promised a future to me, all while another woman's name was on the deed? He had no answer. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in waves. The realization that the house I'd loved wasn't mine. The fact that the man I trusted most had built his life on half-truths. And the cruel irony. I'd spent years decorating someone else's name. I felt hollow. Not loud, not screaming, just emptied out. The next morning, I called my friend Sarah. She was a lawyer. I didn't cry. I simply told her, I need to know my rights. She came over with coffee and a notebook. First, she said gently, you need to find out whether the marriage with you was even legally valid. If he was never divorced from the first wife, then your marriage might not be recognized. And if the house is under her name legally, she hesitated, this could get messy. I stared at my cup, hands wrapped tightly around it. I don't care how messy it gets, I said. I'm not disappearing from a house I helped build. That was the day my heartbreak turned into resolve. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just sat in the living room long after Asim went upstairs. The house felt different now. Colder, foreign, as if the walls themselves had shifted their allegiance. I ran my fingers along the armrest of the sofa, remembering the nights we'd sat here planning our future. Every corner held memories. And now, each memory stung like a hidden splinter. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. Clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't blindly trusting. I was seeing. The next few days were deliberate. I moved like someone collecting evidence in a silent war. I contacted Sarah again and explained everything. She listened carefully, jotting down notes, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. Asim's situation is messy, she said, but not impossible to challenge. First, we'll need the official property documents, marriage records, and proof of your financial contribution to the house. I can get all of that, I replied firmly. Good. And one more thing, she added, her tone sharpening. Do not confront Nadia alone. Not yet. She's already pushing for legal action. You need to be prepared before that happens. I nodded. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a path. Not an easy one, but a path. Meanwhile, Asim tiptoed around the house like a man afraid of his own shadow. He didn't deny the truth anymore, but he tried to soften it. He'd knock on my door at night, trying to talk. She was from a conservative family, he said one evening, standing awkwardly by the doorway. They forced me into it. It was never love. I stared at him. Then why didn't you divorce her before marrying me? He sighed. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought she'd stay away. I let out a bitter laugh. She's not only here, Asim. She's coming for my home. He rubbed his temples. I'll talk to her. I'll fix this. No, I said sharply. You've fixed enough. This time I handle it. 2 weeks later, a legal notice arrived. It was addressed to me, not him, from Nadia Khan. She was filing to claim full ownership of the house, legally arguing that since her name was on the deed and their marriage predated mine, the property was hers by right. My hands trembled as I held the paper, but not from fear, from the realization that this wasn't a private betrayal anymore. It was a battlefield. Sarah and I met in her office that evening. She reviewed the notice carefully. She's making a strong legal claim, Sarah admitted, but she's underestimated one thing: you. If we can prove your financial contributions and show that you lived here as a spouse in good faith, we can contest her claim. How long will this take? I asked. She looked up. Months, maybe a year. But you have a case, I exhaled slowly. Then we fight. Then we fight. The confrontation I had been dreading came sooner than expected. It was a Sunday morning. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, she was standing there, Nadia. She wasn't how I'd imagined. She was elegant, composed, wearing a neatly pressed hijab and a tailored black coat. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. Behind her stood a man, likely her brother, arms folded, jaw set. Mrs. Khan, she said politely, though her tone carried a quiet edge. I didn't correct her. I simply stepped aside. Come in. We sat across from each other in the living room, my living room, like two opposing queens on a chessboard. She looked around, her gaze lingering on the family photos on the wall, the embroidered cushions, the wedding portrait. A faint smile played on her lips. Not kind, not warm, possessive. I'm sure this is difficult for you, she began, her voice measured, but this house legally belongs to me. I don't want things to get ugly, but I have to protect what's rightfully mine. I met her gaze steadily. Rightfully yours? I repeated. You've never lived a single day here. You've never paid a rupee for this place. I built this house with him. She tilted her head. But legally, my name is on the deed. And I'm still his lawful wife. You're... what exactly? The words were like a knife, precise, cruel. I felt a tremor in my hands, but I didn't let it show. I'm the woman who stood by him while you lived in the shadows, I said quietly, and I'm the one who's not leaving without a fight. Her smile faltered for a second, then returned. We'll see, she said calmly, standing up. My lawyer will be in touch. And just like that, she left, her heels clicking against the floor like a clock counting down to war. That night, Asim finally broke down. I didn't think she'd actually do it, he said, pacing the room. She was supposed to stay quiet. I stared at him with cold disbelief. You lied to 2 women and built your life on secrets. Did you really think it would stay quiet forever? He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I've ruined everything. Yes, I replied simply. You have. From that day onward, I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I met with real estate experts, dug up receipts of every renovation I paid for, gathered messages, bank transfers, proof of the life I'd built. Every document was a piece of my truth. Nadia might have the deed, but I had the story. The years of sweat, trust, and contribution that no paper could erase. The house no longer felt like a home, but it became something else, my battleground, and I was ready. The first hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. I remember that day vividly, not for any dramatic outburst or shocking twist, but for the quiet weight that hung in the air. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple white shalwar kameez and a beige shawl. No makeup, no jewelry. I wanted to stand there as myself, not as Asim's wife, not as some rival to Nadia, but as a woman fighting for the life she built. Sarah met me outside the courthouse. She was brisk, focused, her files tucked neatly under one arm. Remember, she whispered as we walked in, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. I nodded, taking a slow breath. Nadia was already inside, sitting at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer and her brother. She looked composed, like someone who had practiced this moment in her head. Asim sat awkwardly behind me, not on either side. His eyes were bloodshot. Whether from guilt or lack of sleep, I didn't care anymore. When the judge called the case, the room fell into a tense silence. Nadia's lawyer spoke first, presenting the property deed, the marriage certificate, and other official records. His voice was smooth, confident. He painted her as the wronged legal wife, a woman whose husband had betrayed her by giving their jointly owned property to another woman. I could feel eyes on me. Strangers, clerks, other lawyers, perhaps even people from our neighborhood. The sensation was like standing under a harsh light, every flaw exposed. Then Sarah rose. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was anchored. She presented evidence of my financial contributions, bank statements, renovation invoices, furniture receipts. She described how I had been living in good faith as a spouse, unaware of the prior marriage. She explained how I had spent years maintaining the property, investing emotionally and financially. She used a term I'll never forget. My client is not an intruder. She is a builder of a home, of a life, of trust that was violated without her knowledge. I looked down at my hands, holding back tears, not out of sadness, but from the sheer validation of being seen. Asim was called to the stand. Watching him walk up was like watching a man approach his own reflection, the one he'd been avoiding for years. The judge's questions were simple, but piercing. Did you legally marry Nadia Khan prior to marrying the respondent? Yes, he said softly. Did you inform the respondent of this previous marriage before marrying her? He hesitated. No. Did you tell either party about the property arrangements clearly? No. His voice cracked on that last no. For the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt something colder. Detachment. This wasn't my husband anymore. This was a man whose choices had led us here. After the hearing, as we stepped outside, the air felt strange. Some people looked at me with sympathy. Others whispered. I caught phrases like dusri biwi and gar ka case high. The shame that might have crushed me before didn't. Because I realized something. This shame wasn't mine to carry. Weeks turned into months. The legal process was slow, but in that time, something unexpected happened. Nadia and I stopped being invisible to each other. At first, our interactions were curt, almost theatrical. Two women performing for a legal system. But one afternoon, after a long session, we found ourselves alone in a narrow corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered above. She stood by the water cooler, sipping slowly. I walked past, but she spoke. You know, she said quietly, I thought you were the villain. I stopped, turning slightly. And I thought you were. She let out a bitter laugh. He lied to both of us. For a brief moment, we weren't enemies, just two women tangled in the same web, spun by the same man. I didn't know about you, I said. Not for a second. She nodded slowly. And I didn't know he built this house with your money. He told me it was bought from his inheritance. We stood there in silence. Not allies, but not strangers either. Meanwhile, Asim tried to fix things in his own clumsy way. He started bringing flowers home, cooking breakfast, offering rides. But I saw through it. His gestures weren't born of love anymore. They were born of fear. Fear of losing the life he'd built through lies. One evening, he placed a bouquet of roses on the table and said, "We can still fix this. All three of us don't have to be enemies." I looked at him steadily. "You broke two lives and expect harmony." Asim, some things can't be glued back together. He didn't argue. He just sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Months later, the verdict finally came. The judge ruled that Nadia remained the legal owner of the property due to the original deed. However, he also recognized my equitable financial interest and good faith occupancy, granting me a substantial compensation from Asim and the right to remain in the house temporarily until repayment. In simpler terms, I wouldn't lose everything, but the house was no longer mine. When I heard the decision, I felt a deep ache. I wasn't victorious, but I wasn't broken either. I had stood my ground, I had spoken my truth, and I had won something more powerful than walls and deeds, my self-respect. After court, as people dispersed, I saw Nadia watching me from a distance. She didn't smile. Neither did I, but there was a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement between us. We had both been lied to, but only one of us had chosen to fight with dignity. The house didn't feel the same after the verdict. Even though I was legally allowed to stay for a few months, every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the wall carried a different weight now. Before, this had been our home. Now, it was a reminder of trust misplaced, of dreams built on sand. I spent the first week in silence. No music, no cooking. Just me, sitting on the veranda each evening with a cup of chai, staring at the bougainvillea climbing the front wall. They had grown wild over the years, twisting their way up the bricks like stubborn veins of memory. I used to see beauty in them. Now I saw something else. Tenacity. No matter how the wall shifted, they kept climbing. One morning, I called my cousin Shazia, who lived in Karachi. She had always been the practical one, the woman who rebuilt her life after divorce without theatrics. When I told her everything, she didn't gasp or cry. She just said, "So, what's next for you?" Not for Asim, not for Nadia, not for the house, for me. That question lingered long after I hung up. The first step was emotional. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never heal me. Asim tried. He sent messages, left notes on the kitchen counter, even offered to start fresh. But his words were like paint on a cracked wall, neat on the surface, hollow underneath. One evening, he came into the living room while I was packing a few boxes. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I'm not sure yet," I replied calmly, "but I know I'm not staying here." His face fell. "You don't have to do this. We can fix—" "No, Asim," I said, turning to face him fully. "You broke this. And I'm done patching up walls I didn't crack." He didn't fight me, just stood there, as if realizing for the first time that I was truly leaving. The second step was practical. Sarah, my lawyer, connected me with a women's legal aid group that helped me open my own bank account, separate my finances completely, and start searching for rental places. For the first time in years, I was handling everything myself. Electricity bills, rental agreements, even choosing curtains. It might sound mundane, but those small acts felt like planting seeds in new soil. 2 months later, I found a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't grand. The walls were bare, the kitchen small. But when I stood in the empty living room for the first time, with sunlight pouring through the window onto the tiled floor, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. I remember sitting on the floor that evening with takeout biryani in a plastic box, my back against the wall, no expensive furniture, no husband's voice in the background, just me. And peace. Asim visited once more, a week before I moved out. He stood at the gate, looking tired. "I never wanted this," he said softly. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I once loved deeply who had become a stranger through his choices. "I believe you," I replied, "but sometimes wanting isn't enough." "Choices build lives, Asim, and yours built this ending." He nodded slowly, eyes downcast. It wasn't vengeance, it wasn't hatred, it was closure. On my last day in the house, I walked through every room one final time. The bedroom where I had imagined growing old, the kitchen where I had learned his favorite recipes, the living room where laughter used to echo. I placed my hand on the wall and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the house itself, but to the woman I had been inside it, the one who had loved, trusted, fought, and finally chosen herself. Nadia moved back into the house shortly after. We didn't have a dramatic confrontation or tearful goodbye. She simply sent me a short message: "I hope you find peace." We both deserved better than lies, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness, just quiet understanding. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my identity. I took a part-time job at a small boutique, started attending a women's book club, and even reconnected with old college friends. People sometimes whispered behind my back, words like "Dusri biwi," "Keswali," "Bewafa mardki biwi." But I had learned something powerful. People's whispers can't define you unless you let them in. Each evening, I would water the potted plants on my new balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. No chandeliers, no marble floors, but my soul felt light. One rainy night, as thunder rolled in the distance, I sat by the window with a notebook and began to write. Not for anyone else, but for myself. I wrote about trust, about betrayal, about the strange way life can fall apart and rebuild itself in unexpected shapes. And at the end of that entry, I wrote, "Home isn't a house. It's where you decide to stand tall again." I didn't hate Asim. I didn't envy Nadia. They were chapters, painful, complicated, but necessary, and I had finally closed the book. When I look back now, it almost feels like I lived two separate lives. One inside that house, where love felt certain, walls felt permanent, and betrayal was unthinkable. And another beyond those gates, where truth shattered illusions, but also set me free. For a long time, I thought my strength was in holding everything together, in forgiving quietly, in pretending the cracks weren't there. But real strength is sometimes in walking away with your dignity intact, even when your heart is still catching up. The house was never truly mine, not legally, not structurally, but the life I built afterward, that was entirely my own. I learned that betrayal can take everything you thought was yours, your trust, your plans, even your home, but it can't take your choice. And I chose to stop standing in the ruins, waiting for someone else to rebuild. If you're listening to my story today, maybe you've stood in front of a door you thought was yours, only to realize someone else held the key. Maybe your betrayal wasn't about a house. Maybe it was a friend, a sibling, a partner. Whatever it was, I hope you remember this. You are not defined by what was taken from you, but by what you choose to build next. Would you have stayed and fought for the house? Or walked away to start anew? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your heart. And if my story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories like mine.